Hello guys and welcome to this new video. This video will be part of a video series. Well, I'll show you how I made this lizard. This will not be a real tutorial, this will be a commented time-lapse where I will stop in some points and will do some tutorial parts. Anyway, I hope this will be useful for you and let's go to the video. Before even opening Blender, I always do one thing that helps me a lot, and it's searching for references. Obviously you can use Google, but I suggest you to use also Pinterest. I think that using references is really important, unless you have so much experience that you remember how every animal and everything is made. I don't have such experience, so I need a lot of references. I usually don't only search for photos of how a subject, for example an animal, is made outside. I also search for things like muscles, skeleton and such. That helps me to understand how the subject I want to represent is made inside, so I can make it more believable. I will leave a link to the collection of the references I pinned on my Pinterest, so you'll be able to use them. And one more thing I recommend you to do before starting is activate or download and activate two add-ons that I use a lot: 3D Print Toolbox and the Sculpt tools. I will use them during the video. In this work, I started by adding a base cube. Then I just started to scale, subdivide and extrude this cube until I had a basic form of a lizard. As you can see, I used a lizard skeleton as reference to help myself to block out the right proportions. Initially, as you can see, I split the head in two parts because I wanted to make a lizard with an open mouth. But then I changed my mind, so you will see that I will join the two parts together. To make the basic form of the tail, I used a curve. After placing the curve to the right point, I went to the Properties panel and changed the fill option from half to full. And then in the Geometry section, I changed the bevel depth value. In this way our curve starts to having a form. Then I just started to model the curve and giving it the form I wanted by using the Alt-S shortcut for scaling the bevel depth and S to scale the controllers. If your curve have a too much squared form, in your opinion, you can just change the bevel resolution. That will make it more smooth. The next step was adding another basic cube and then merging all the vertices together at center to use the remaining vertex with the skin modifier and the mirror modifier to make the lizard's legs. With the skin modifier, the shortcut to scale the thickness is Ctrl A. To make the hind legs, I just duplicated the front legs and then changed them to fit the right shape. Like I said before, it's really important to have more than one references while you work. This is the point where I changed my mind about the head form, and I decided to join the lower and the upper part of the head and make the lizard with the closed mouth. If something similar happens to you and you decide to join two parts which were separate before, remember to delete the edge that is inside the geometry, because if you leave it, you could have then some problems while sculpting. When I'm satisfied by the form of my base mesh, I just join everything together. Be careful not to use the join operation, but the union operation that you have in the options of the add-on sculpt tools. At this point I made a pretty big mistake, because I forget to close the hole that we had at the bottom of the mesh we created for the tail. When you generate a mesh from a curve, there is always a hole at the bottom side of the curve, unless it has the circumference value to 0. And it's really important to close that hole, because if you don't do this and you join it to the rest of the mesh, you will have problems while sculpting. So at that point I will show you what I should do. First of all, let's hide the parts we don't need in this moment. Then just select the curve. Then press Alt-C and press Mesh from Curve. Then let's go to the 3D printing tools options. Let's try to click on Make Manifold. In some cases this should close all the holes, but as you see in this case it didn't work. The Make Manifold option is used in 3D printing, so it's supposed to do things like close holes, remove internal faces and such. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In this case it didn't work, so what we're gonna do is going to edit mode, press Alt and click. In this way we gonna select the edge loop of the hole and then press F to fill it. Then, just to be sure, go to the object mode and click Make Manifold another time. Once you're done, just select all the pieces, apply all the modifiers. If you rotated or scaled your meshes in object mode, remember to apply rotation and scale, because if you don't, then when you start sculpting, you could have some problems in sculpting. Then, with the all meshes selected, let's go to the sculpt panel and click Union. In this way, all our meshes now are one object. Now we can go to the sculpt mode and start sculpting. If you see that strange things happens when you're sculpting, like you have the mirror activated but it do strange things, like in this case, probably the problem is in the origin. So what you can do is just switch again to the object mode, go to the tools panel, go to set origin and click set origin to the center of mass. go back to the sculpt mode, and to symmetrize everything, just go to the Topo options and click symmetrize. Set direction of the symmetrizing before. It will depend on the orientation of your mesh. And now you can see that your geometry is fixed and you can keep sculpting. The problem is solved. Anyway, let's go back to the time lapse. At this point, I joined all pieces together, including the tail with the hole, and at this point I started to sculpt. Now, before starting, let me show you for a moment the options that I use for sculpting. I always use the dynamic topology option activated. I set the subdivide option to subdivide collapse. The detail option is set always to constant detail. I start with a pretty low resolution and then I increase the value depending on how much details I want to add to my mesh. Generally, I use clay strips brush to add or remove geometry. If I want something more heavy, I use sculpt draw brush. And if I want a sharp stroke, I use the crease brush. Here you can find the symmetry option and you can set it to x-axis, y or z. And then there is the smooth brush that just smooths out the geometry. The flatten brush helps you to create a more hard surface look. The hack brush helps you to create new geometry. And grab brush basically does the same but doesn't create new geometry, as you can see. It just grab the already existing geometry. These are the options and the brushes I use more, and I think that if you get used to them, you can start with sculpting. Let's come back to the time lapse. Here I started to sculpt the main shape of my lizard. Until I came across the tail, and in this point I realized that I had some problem there. As you can see, there are some holes in the geometry. And now I will show you how I solved this problem. First of all, I tried to do make manifold, but as you can see, it didn't work very well. So I decided to try to find a solution by adding a cylinder, adapting it a bit to the form of the lizard body. Then I selected again my lizard and hit again make manifold. Then I adapted a bit my cylinder, making sure that it closed the hole that make manifold operation created on the lizard geometry. Always pay attention to the normals. If you see that you have faces that are darker than other faces, probably they have flipped normals. In this case, select the face and just click to flip direction. Then go to the object mode, to sculpt panel, and with the main mesh and the cylinder selected, just hit union. As you can see, we have no faces inside the geometry, so we solved the problem and we can go on with the sculpting. Once that I was happy with the general form of my lizard, I added another basic cube that I would use to start making the lizard feet. Just like with legs, I merged all the vertices into one, then added a skin modifier, a mirror modifier, and a subdivision surface modifier. I think that here I did a little mistake, because in my opinion the fingers came out a bit too much thin. I think that's because I was watching the references too close, and in this way I kind of lost the proportions. If you are doing your lizard, keep this in mind and do the fingers more chubby. To make the hind feet, I just duplicated the forefeet without starting from zero and just modified them to fit the right form. When I was happy with the form of both feet, I copied them to have a backup base mesh. Then I applied all the modifiers, the rotation and scale, and then selected everything and hit union. Then I added a base sphere to make the eyes. In this way it was easier to make the head shape around the eyes. Then I started to sculpt the fingers. That was particularly hard because they are thin, The best way to sculpt something thin is set a higher resolution, keeping the straight of clay brush to a low value, like 0.10. Just pass the brush on the fingers. When you will use smooth brush, they will not be destroyed because of the high resolution of the mesh. If you hit Z, you can see the amount of the vertices you have in your mesh. And this could help you to understand where you have to add more resolution and where you don't. At this point, I refined a bit the head shape. Here I didn't, but you should always disable the symmetry lock when you're drawing something like a line in the middle of your geometry. At this point I came across another problem. As you can see, there are some holes and there is a face into the geometry. Probably when I united the geometries, something went wrong. So to solve this problem, let's just do the same thing we did with the tail. I created the new geometry using a vertex, a skin modifier, mirror and subsurf. Once that it's done, I just apply all the modifiers and then just join everything together. And as you can see, our problem is solved. Something that can help you when sculpting is the option Alt-B. This option allows you to cut the piece you are sculpting. In this way, the rest of the geometry doesn't annoy you. When you're done, just hit Alt-B again and you can see again the rest of your mesh. At this point, I added some forms using line stroke. Later I will change my mind and erase everything, but you can see that the line stroke is really useful if you want to draw some straight lines. Here I added some shapes to the lizard torso, trying to give a feeling like it has rib cage under its skin. In this way I wanted to add more believability to the lizard. Here I made the ear holes using the jaw brush. At this point I changed my mind and I erased the lines on the back of the lizard because I opted for a more realistic look without strange things on the back. I did it with the smooth brush and the clay strips. At the end I gave a final smooth to the mesh, and here I was done with the sculpting part. I would like to remind you that I'm still learning like you do. So if you know a better way or a faster way to do the same thing I did in this video, just write it in the comments below. It will be helpful for me and for other people watching this video. You can also purchase my lizard on websites like CG Trader, TurboSquid, or even on the Blender market. You will find these links and other links I talked about during the video in the description below. So, thank you for watching, I really appreciate you, and see you in my next video. Goodbye!